Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Oversharing podcast. My name is James Pham. I am the co-founder and CEO of Opsin. I am also your host. I'm very excited to have Montez here with us today. So Montez, why don't you go ahead and introduce about yourself and what you're doing and things like that.
Yes, hi James. My name is Montez Fitzpatrick. I'm the CISO over at Navis Healthcare, and just doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. As a lifelong security learner, and of myself, and there's a lot of new, very cool things on the horizon to talk about.
I'm super excited to have you on the podcast, Montez.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, especially I think you like when we talk personally, I think you mentioned a lot of great ideas and observation about the industry. So one thing that you mentioned about the adoption of AI and how you think about it compared to blockchain and other previous ways. So maybe if you could share a little bit more on like what your observation in terms of the adoption of AI, and then we can get started from there.
Oh, absolutely. So this fair warning is not like academically researched, right? This is just my feeling on the matter.
Yeah.
As I think about it, if you've been in the technology industry for any amount of time, you will see these these crests and these troughs of how technology is adopted. And typically, it does follow the bleeding edge, early adopters, the middle phase there where you have the huge groundswell of adoption, and then the individuals that you must drag along. Almost always without question, that's the way it's technology adoption has been following the adoption curve of most new things. I think that the new generation of artificial intelligence tools has sort of put that on its head. And even we saw with blockchain, right? So blockchain was the adoption was sort of bleeding edge and very like tech nerds like ourselves and like the tech bros, and never really got beyond there. As far as AI though, AI and the way that it's been adopted has been very different in the fact that the that middle group has moved up with the bleeding edge and early adopters, and the only people who are not really necessarily participating are the folks who must be dragged forward. And that means a lot of different things, especially professionally, when you come from the sphere of looking at it from, oh, let's say in an organizational setting where you have governance around it. And so when you have these committees, and hopefully if your organization is looking at AI, you have an AI governance or AI steering committee that's helping to usher it in for your organization. We have had quite the groundswell of support from various leaders in various departments. Everyone wants to be a part of what's going on with AI.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really good observation, right? Like if you think back about the history, right? There was internet wave, um, and then
Hmm.
there's a cloud wave, and now there's AI wave. Right? So for internet wave, they need the telecom provider to lay all the cables for the people to adopt internet, right? So that physical aspect of it take years, right? In the year 2000 stuff like that, right? In the cloud world, right? Like okay, even if there's a cloud there, but the adoption has been like this, like very very slowly adopt, just because it's not so trivial for someone to spin up like a virtual machine on in the cloud and stuff like that. You actually need to have some sort of equities to do it. So
That's right.
like it takes equities and things like that. So that's where like the technology adoption curve come in with like an early adopter that go there. But AI is different. Anyone with a laptop or like a phone can just freaking go to like ChatGPT or like Claude and things like that, and you start using and see the the result immediately, right? So I think that's probably one of the big changes compared to previous wave in terms of the technology adoption.
And absolutely. So I certainly remember the early days of the internet, and maybe even more appropriately stated, some of the early days of the the web. And I remember very vividly, companies who were, just beginning to adopt like their web presence. Certainly wasn't even called web presence at those days, right? Just their web page, and as they got on the web, there, a lot of times they would advertise at the, at the end of their commercial, right? And I remember they'd be like, www dot, then whatever it was, dot com, saying, basically the whole thing. And it was new, and it was exciting. A lot of people got it, most people didn't, and it still followed, that curve, which, the internet, most important invention, within the last 50 years. But wow, yeah, amazing. AI is different, yeah, just for all the reasons you stated.
Yeah, you think about like how not too long ago when ChatGPT came out and how ubiquitous Gen AI nowadays across, like what you said, like it's not just about early adopter, it's the middle group that are also using it, right? Like it's just amazing. And it's not just about personal usage. A lot of enterprises are using Gen AI. Um, and so maybe question to you, like healthcare traditionally are very risk averse, and usually they one of the later group that joined the wave, right? They have so much sensitive data in the environment and all of that stuff, right?
That's
Uh,
right.
and regulation around the neck is what I would say. How have you seen the adoption of Gen AI in healthcare specifically?
You bring up a great point again. I've actually been surprised. I don't know if it's pleasantly surprised or dismayed, but I've been very surprised at how quickly the value prop for AI has been realized for healthcare specifically. And you have some healthcare organizations
Mm,
that are really, in the forefront, who are doing some
mm,
very cool, very novel things with regard to that. Now there is always, right, as a security guy,
mm,
in my just natural contrarian nature, there's always the worry about, data, and then there's the worry about the potential to overshare that data. This is the oversharing problem, quite frankly, is a problem that we've had prior to AI.
mm,
And I don't know if, I will say, AI in and of itself exacerbates it, just because by the sheer volume of new data that's been created, and just, the multiples and of, orders of magnitude probably of new, terabytes, more of data that's been created. So it's been a bit of a headache and to wrangle. And if you don't have very solid data stewardship, in the fact of like, okay, so you might have your, your research teams that are, leveraging these data sets, and, plugging it through, generative AI, or even, agentic, right? Some of the newest waves of things that can be done, and you're not exactly certain where that data resides and how it's used, and even if it's accurate, you might have a lot of might have some significant problems on your hands, especially with maybe data that's been stale. I think that could be a huge problem, something that might rear up, where the artificial intelligence in and of itself is looking at this data to try to make some, assumptions about its new state of the world,
mm,
whereas a human being, as they are looking at this data, may not actually, leverage, certainly some of this older stale data, but, you know the program itself really doesn't care, and that may be a parameter that
Mm.
us, as we're looking through this data, as we're looking to get these new results, we may not really be thinking about that because we wouldn't have made that mistake. So yeah, I think that's a very real worry, from a governance perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And that resonates with a lot of folks that I talk to, especially in the healthcare sectors. So maybe I think we can dive a little bit deeper on like what's the consequences of that, right? I think that it is a problem, but like what are at stake if say that you don't do this well and you try to adopt Gen AI, and what happened? Like what's the consequences?
Well, maybe the consequence itself would be, I guess maybe we're starting to look at the potential of like a type 2 error, right? Which would be at things a false negative, and the our ability to say, oh, we think that this is correct, but not know that it's incorrect. And just because of the deluge of information, because there is an amount of analysis that we just as human beings can't do. And so there has to be some new expertise to be generated that I think probably only exists in very small pockets,
Mm,
certainly not pervasive throughout the entirety of all of the different domains and disciplines there. And so I think that could be a huge problem, is that we could end up with data that's just inaccurate, but we don't know enough to know that the data is inaccurate. And then we're making decisions based off of inaccurate data, which, don't get me wrong, we humans have based decisions off of inaccurate data for millennia now, right? So that in and of itself is nothing new, but maybe the surety of the fact that we could be basing a decision off of wrong data, and then there could be decisions based off of that decisions, and basically we end up with something that is turtles all the way down, right? Where the turtle is in quick the turtle on the bottom is in quicksand. Who knows?
yeah, it's cascaded, right? Like it start
Right.
with one wrong decision, some other people take that as a truth, and then they make their decision based on that decision, and it kind of like cascaded throughout the chain, right? And I think that's
Right.
one of the challenge when it comes to Gen AI, which I think you kind of highlight very well. There is kind of like the reliability of the decision made by AI. um, and then I think the second thing that I often heard is, like a lot of time for enterprise, for healthcare specifically, what they worry about the most is sometimes like there's a lot of PHI data in the data set one way or another, right? Like people have access to like PHI data, while in fact they should have no business doing with it, right? So that another thing that I kind of like heard over the time, but curious to hear your thoughts there.
That's absolutely so. That's data stewardship.
Hmm.
By and large, everyone is trying to do the absolute best job they can do, and certainly there is a good amount of people who want to get the attaboy and just look at doing something novel, right? Finding this polished diamond, right, in this pile of coal, as we are moving towards that, and people can see that, oh wow, this is a tool that can help me potentially do that to differentiate myself. And I absolutely don't have any problems with someone who's trying to do that. But
Hmm.
when you take that tact, and you are start to like really look at ingesting all of this extra data, because now you can ingest and analyze more data than you've ever been able to before, especially if you aren't necessarily like a database guru, right, or something like that. So it's
Mm.
your ability to do something new, and you can find something new, and the data stewardship of it, like, as you suggested here in healthcare, with adding protected health information PHI into a data set where it normally doesn't belong. Something like that would be, I would consider, a failure, in my team, and because we didn't have that data itself properly labeled and sensitivity. So there's a lot to be done there, and we are in this sort of weird, like nebulous cloud, where it's going, right, really, I mean, where we're looking at what can be done and what should be done, and there is, quite honestly, a lot of catch up. I don't know, and maybe James, you tell me if you think this is so. Certainly, for us, tech guys and gals out there, AI, this wasn't something that was new, right? And if you've paid attention at all, within the last few years, you would have seen this coming. And so, would you suggest that we've been caught like flat-footed on this? And if so, like, how do we get there? How do we get to this point where we were caught so flat-footed?
Yeah, I think definitely that's something that we got caught flat-footed, right? I think like what you said, like that problem, it's not new. It's always been there, especially like the data stewardship problem that you mentioned. Like there's a lot of data that floating around the enterprises. It all has always been there, right? I think it's just that what it changed is how powerful AI is nowadays. Like in the past, it take people like quite a bit of time to see all these protected health information and get into access these information, and they also like not using a lot of these protected health information in their decision making. But with AI, whether you want it or not, um, Gen AI can be very powerful in looking up relevant data and help you make your decisions. But a lot of time, it also means that it surface all this information that you have access to, but you don't even know that you have access to it, right? Like,
Yeah, and here's one thing, and I think you made a very good point, especially that underscores or highlights PHI. Now, as a warning, I'm going to paint it with a very broad brush, so everyone who works in and around healthcare, don't come after me, right? For healthcare security. But in general, as I've always sort of understood it, with what can't be done with any one individual record, right? So your healthcare record, or my healthcare record. So anything that happens with that healthcare record, whether it be like something that's like aggregated, or let's just say some analysis with that record,
mm,
right? So the covered entity, right? So that be the your provider, your doctor, who sees you, and then maintains that healthcare record on your behalf, of course, which is still your healthcare record. Anything that happens to that healthcare record should be done to the benefit of you. So anything that happens with your healthcare record that you own, that the covered entity is the custodian of, any sort of analytics that happen should be for your direct benefit.
mm,
And so that is maybe a potential pitfall that I can see with artificial intelligence.
yeah,
And that is so easy to grab large swaths of data for analysis, and it gets sort of mixed up. Now, I do know that there is a bit of a trapdoor that you get with being able to have that data as de-identified, but let's just set that to the side for right now and just say that, okay, this is James's record.
yeah,
and they get stirred up into this pot, right? And then if that if whatever the outcome in of itself can't be traced directly back to you, that potentially is a violation, right? And so that is something that I think we have to be very wary of and careful of, because I think it's very tantalizing to look and see, oh, this is all the things that we can do, but then as far as if we're going to actually have these PHI within our data sets, right? And we're doing very cool things with with AI and PHI necessary things. We need to make sure those necessary things are to the benefit of the people who we're using those data sets of. So that I think could be a special particular challenge in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. So we talk a lot about data and PHI and all that stuff. We didn't touch a lot on the human aspect of it, right? Like the people in the company. And as you pointed out at the beginning, AI is very different ways in that everyone in the company adopt AI in one way or another, and it sounds like everyone have different views about how the AI should be, how it should be governed, how it should be secure, how it should be used, and so on. Um, so I don't know, like from a security perspective, what are the challenges that you face on not just on the data side, like what we discussed, but on the human side of the house there?
Oh, sure. AI is cool. Everybody wants to be involved, which ultimately is a good thing. When you have more people involved, it brings a lot of perspective, and a lot of those perspectives are quite frankly most often something that I would not have thought of. But just like anything, right? So this is the classic interface problem, right? So the more people that you have, and the more interfaces that you have with those people, is that there's more decisions that certainly have to be made. Now,
Mm,
luckily, we have a pretty good process where I work, and with a pretty good decision tree
mm,
on how, like, okay, if this is something that is, these are the oh milestones or metrics or keystones or whatever you want to call them, that this will now move to from this initial early stage into something that is going to be adopted, right? So the net benefit is known, and everyone has weighed in on it. So that's a process. But I can see,
mm,
and certainly in as I've talked to other my peers in cases where there have been some uh, paralysis in the decision making on looking at moving forward with something that could be a benefit that's AI related, and that a lot of times is because of the, well, one, the interfaces, and two, I think a lot of it also is the fact that just you know I would find most CISOs like myself are fairly risk averse. And so there's
yeah.
often a battle between the folks who really want to take some risks for the benefit of the organization, but may not know enough to articulate that this is a risk that's worth taking. And if you can't articulate why this risk is worth taking, then all of the voices who are of the folks who are risk averse may actually win out in that case. And then it may be a bit of a lost opportunity. And I think for my peers, that we have to be able to find ways to go into this cautiously, right? Grease the skids, but still be cautious, because you know as we talked earlier, James, I think that this is not going to go anywhere, right? It's only going to become more
Yeah.
complex, and the waiting it out to see, well, is this going to actually stick around or not? Is not. I mean, it's going to stick.
Too
It's
late.
here.
It's
Yeah,
too late.
you're right.
Yeah.
It's here. And so now your gap, if you're looking to get on the on ramp, is going to be monumentous, right? And to the point where it, you know, waiting too long could be relatively detrimental to your organization.
Mm,
We talk all the time, especially about business continuity and RTOs and RPOs and all those good things, but this is a false start of an RTO that if you wait too long, your business may have a hard time recovering from, potentially.
mm.
So
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So what you don't want to do is to get into this analysis paralysis by analysis kind of situation
you do, yeah.
where everyone was like, "Hey, I want to chime in," and then it's like you just try you just try to drive consensus so hard that nothing got moving, and in the meantime, all the employees in the company already move on, and they are probably using like 10, 20 different tools, 10 AI tools, because like the productivity gain is there, right? Like if you don't have a policy, they're gonna just do it anyway, right? Like
Shadow IT, we didn't even really touch on that, and I thank you for bringing that up. But you're right. So the reality of it is that it's out there. People are going to find a way to do it and leverage it. If especially if leadership stays silent on the matter,
yeah.
they're going to find ways to workarounds to do these things, and now you might even have a bigger problem on your hand because non-public data potentially could be out in the world, so out in the public domain, which is not something that we want. That's for sure.
Yeah, and consider that you are being too risk averse, and then you ended up in that situation. Imagine that, right?
Yeah,
so, so we
it's a
actually,
balance.
huh?
My apologies. I said it's a balance.
It's a
It's a
balance.
balance. So that's right, and it's
Exactly.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
it's a spectrum, and then there's a balance that you need to hit, right? The balance is that paralysis by analysis, and then the other extreme of it is you make decision too hastily. Like you just like, hey, like this is the
Right,
policy. I'm
right,
the CISO. I want to make decision. You want to follow it. Um,
right.
that would be like the other extreme end of the spectrum that you should not want to end up with.
No, exactly right. Right. There is a sweet spot in the middle that I think every healthy organization needs to fit within. Now, where where any one particular organization is, that's up for the governance steering committee to try to determine that. But yeah, everyone needs to be on the same page for the benefits. And I will say that you know my someone I respect a lot, Alan Berry over at Centene, we were discussing, and he was mentioning that there are a lot of tools out there that are like functions, like they are selling like functionality that's masquerading as a product. And I so we are still on the early side of this, the whole AI adoption train, and there will be surely a lot of consolidation. But again, to underscore the earlier point is that we really probably can't wait until the dust settles and these different tools and vendors have been like absorbed, and in that I think that's probably too late. For a running organization. Still, honestly, certainly, I think all these tools will be give a lot of ability for new organizations to be able to sprout up, people who've had ideas who can actually now you know take the ideation, use some tools, and then create a company.
Mm.
Boom, I think that is only going to be on the upswing. But I guess what I just to be clear, I want to refer to organizations that are already ready, that already have revenue, and that are maybe waiting to do this adoption. Yeah, those are the organizations I believe will be in trouble because their runway is going to get very short.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, so we talk a lot about the data risk. We talk about the people risk, right? Like how you get consensus, but you're not too much consensus. Uh, and then we kind of touched by briefly on the shadow IT, right? Shadow AI, rather, right? Like, what we can either go a little bit deeper on the shadow AI, or we can kind of talk about a broader risk. So, what are the risks that you've seen when it comes to Gen AI in general?
Really, I think in both cases,
Hmm.
it's all about, following the data. Just kind of like, like following the money, follow the data. So there is,
Yeah,
I will, again, my peers out there, don't come after me for saying this. But I think in general, around a lot of organizations, maybe most, possibly all, we don't have the greatest handle on the data that's being created, how our fellow colleagues are leveraging that data in the business to make money, right, for the organization, and then the ultimate quantifiable value of any one really particular piece of data, right? It's sort of a lot of times that can be something of a black box, and that is going to be a challenge. And so there is a need for us in the cybersecurity, information security, whatever you want to call it,
yeah.
to be very cognizant of the ways in which the business uses the data.
Mm,
And so I think in either case, with the further risks with AI, Gen AI or what have you, and then shadow AI. In both cases, I think a lot of it could be subverted
mm,
by the by having a little bit better knowledge of our data, right, and where it basically the fundamentals, right, where data sits, where it's used, and where it's being transmitted through. And I think a lot of most healthy organizations from if we were to take it as data as a sort of like this variable, like, yeah, I know, yeah, it's over here, and it rests on these, on these arrays, and it kind of traverses through these switches and these pipes, and here are my connections and that. I think we understand that,
mm.
but I mean, just when you talk about getting down to the minutia of like, oh, like what parts of data are being leveraged and being used, and what's being used, so that as we look at potentially like non-human identities, which is absolutely massive opportunity. I won't say problem.
Yeah.
And then we use and look at, well, the of course then with that, with human identities and non-human identities, the potential for us to take the easy route, right, and give and then over permission those identities to have more data than what they actually need. And I think a lot of that happens because we quite often don't understand or know what the data actually is and how it's actually leveraged within the business.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, right? Like what you said, in the real world, you would chase the money. In the cyber, in the internet, in the virtual world, you would chase the data, which
Right.
is somewhat of the lifeblood of the internet, right? Like,
That's right.
and I think for you to set the guardrails that is meaningful and that is helpful for the organization, you really need to understand like what data being used and what are people using the data for and stuff like that. It's like what you said, it take more time for you to kind of understand that and put guardrails around that as opposed to like just make it wide open. Nothing for you to worry, nothing for you to configure. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's I was nodding in agreement because that's there, and so that's I think that we've done a good job of the guardrails, and maybe this is the could be potentially indicative, right? So we've all in information security, right? As we know that we've looked at the whole tortoise shell, right? Most organizations are the turtle shell, right? At least at one point in time, and that's where we had the big move towards defense in depth and having different layers of defense.
Mm.
And this could potentially, and maybe I should be thinking of some sort of name to like coin this kind of thing, but this could be like the first time, James. Just joking, but the reality of it potentially is that we have this second turtle shell essentially with the guardrails that we put around data, as we put the guardrails around this data, just as like this whole like there isn't necessarily the assignment of the value of the data is basically this data as it sits in this particular bucket. But as far as the introspection into the bucket of the various elements of that data and how it's actually used within the organization, I think quite often, and maybe there's some good folks that are out there that are at that level, but in my anecdotal experience, that is not that's not far reaching are the case. And the minutia of the data, the different elements of the data, and what is actually being used by what service or process, absolutely not well known. And I think that's probably the next frontier for us.
Definitely, definitely. Um, so I think that as a healthcare organization, you are moving, to adopt Gen AI and things like that. So any specific lessons that you would share with the audience on like how to think about adopting Gen AI, and especially from a security standpoint, like what advice would you have?
I'm just a babe in the woods myself there, but I would say if I if I had to, just if I had to give any sort of takeaway, it would be, and maybe this is a broken record, but it would be just understanding how the information will be used
Mm,
as you're looking at going forward, and then to be very specific about the information that's being ingested into this new system,
mm,
and having a good account of that information that's being used. I think building that in early will save a lot of heartache later. And now I understand the fact that if you're looking at building that in early, a little bit of bureaucracy, that's a little bit of could potentially look at slowing down the process. And if there's anything that we all know, is that anybody who has got a vision for something doesn't want to be slowed down by security at all whatsoever. And so insecurity, for us, I think we, as a challenge, we need to be able to be very quick with our assessments
mm.
and to be thorough, but to be able to move at a little faster pace so that we can, not necessarily be an anchor to those who are trying to move. And as we know that a lot of these initiatives are going to fail, we can't be the part of it unless it's necessary.
Mm.
We can't be the part of it that really, facilitates that failure, right? So like this initiative can't fail because of us. It has to fail sort of on its own merits.
Yeah,
And but we have to be, willing and able to, still add, appropriate and acceptable security, whatever that means for your organization, right, to that new system. So that's
yeah,
going to be a huge challenge, I think.
yeah. They shouldn't fail because security say so, or security put too much guardrail on them that they can't succeed.
That's right, because then the next time they're going to just start up and they're going to cut you out, and that's not what we need.
That is true, right? Like why do I need this guy? Like they here to make my initiative fail. Like I
That's
just
right.
want I just wanted to work, and then maybe I'll engage them later.
Exactly right. Then we're back to shadow AI, and now at that second example, security isn't built in from the beginning,
Yeah,
and now we even have a more complex system, right? Because there's one thing that we've always been able to bank on with a system, right? It was the fact of determinism, right? So idempotent operations, one plus one is always two, and there is enough variance with Gen AI as has been built in that asking the same question doesn't necessarily give you the same output, and so there's a lot of
yeah,
that's a different thing for us, and that's even just saying those words sort of unsettles me a little bit because I'm as I've always kind of grown up, I've always been very I've been well blanketed by the fact of determinism in our information systems, and so this is something that's a little different.
especially security. You cannot
Yeah,
just say that today they have access to this, tomorrow because today they don't have access to it, but tomorrow they get access to things because they say things a little bit different.
that's true. That's a true statement. So yeah, absolutely.
All right, I think we are about time. So appreciate your time appearing on the podcast, and thank you so much for sharing so much insight. I really like your energy with blockchain, and then chasing chasing data as if you chase money in the
That's
real
right.
world is some very good and interesting energy that I learned from the podcast. So thank you so much for your time, Montez.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it quite a bit.